started, I want to welcome everybody. My name is Cindy Meserly. I am the CEO of the Philadelphia Tri-State Chapter of the Lupus Foundation of America. Thrilled to have you all here tonight, and welcome to the Navigating the Pediatric Lupus Journey webinar series. This is part 2, digging into the details. This is the second in a 4-part series, which will focus a more in-depth look into pediatric lupus. The 2 remaining sessions include part 3, which will be in February or March, dates still to be determined, so stay tuned for details on that. Of early next year, we'll be managing life as a young adult. And part 4, which will be in the spring of 2021, which is seriously right around the corner. How did that even happen? Is called Living Your Best Life. So we'll look at a holistic approach of pediatric lupus and living with pediatric lupus. So watch your emails for updates from your local chapter, and for these and more upcoming programs, because I know we're all doing still lots virtually, so it's good stuff. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. We're thrilled that you're here, and we're going to start off with a presentation by Dr. Kelly Rouster-Stevens, and followed by our panel discussion. So if you have questions during either parts of those programs, please use the Q&A. You can use the chat feature, chat with other people who are participating. Feel free to connect as you wish. Unfortunately, we're not able to really address very specific diagnosis or treatment questions. If you do have more general questions, we welcome those. If you have very specific questions, I do recommend that you go directly to your personal doctor, or reach out to your local chapter to see if you need a connection for somebody and a question maybe that your doctor may not be able to answer, not quite sure, but reach out to either the chapter. You can also email us at info@lupustristate.org, and we'll do our best to get you an answer of that question. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available through your local chapter as well as on the LFA Tri-State website. And I know if you joined up through our chapter, we will be emailing out, which likely the other chapters will as well. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Kelly Rouster-Stevens to you. Dr. Stevens is a pediatric rheumatology specialist at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She's a PharmD and has over 20 years of experience in the medical field. She graduated from University of Cincinnati College of Medicine Medical School in 2000. Dr. Rouster-Stevens is the Pediatric Rheumatology Fellowship Program Director, Pediatric Rheumatology, Emory University, and Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Emory University. Dr. Stevens is also a member of the Lupus Foundation of America, Georgia Chapter Medical Advisory Board. Dr. Stevens, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We are honored to have you here, and I'm going to hand it over to you. Share away, and we'll get into it.
Thank you. I wanted to take just a second to thank Cindy and Terry for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be with the group this evening. I want to make sure, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, so I was tasked with discussing what to expect after being diagnosed with lupus. And, as I thought about the title for this, I want to express that you can take control. Don't let lupus control you. You can take control. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Before I jump into how we take control, I did want to briefly review lupus. It is an autoimmune disease. Remember that our immune system is—
Dr. Stevens, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Do you share a full slideshow? Your slides are just very small. Do full screen on that.
It is full screen.
Because I'm seeing your it's pretty small.
Okay, let me try a different. Is it still small?
It's a little better, or just seeing your
let me take it out of presentation mode. Is
that might be better, and seeing, use regular mode.
Is that better?
Let's see, give it a minute. We don't see it yet. I'm still seeing your Zoom screen from your.
Okay, let's try.
Sorry, thanks for your patience, everybody.
No problem.
I'm sure everybody can. There we go. That's better. And then if you
Is that better?
Yeah, if you go into share slides that way, a slideshow from there, you'll be in good shape.
Is that better?
There you go. That's perfect.
We're good. Okay, okay. So immune system, our immune system is designed to fight infection, and for unknown reasons in lupus, our immune system starts to attack the body. So that's what we mean by autoimmune. One of the challenges with lupus is it's really a variable presentation. It can affect any organ, and no two patients are alike. The other piece that I think is important to appreciate is 20% of patients are diagnosed in childhood. So a lot of people don't realize that kids can get lupus as well as adults. And in fact, 1 in 5 people with lupus was diagnosed before the age of 18. So you have this new diagnosis of lupus in your child, and it is overwhelming. Keep in mind, everything that we are doing for your child is a big balancing act. What I would suggest is you're going to have a lot of questions, and it's very overwhelming. So if you can, keep a log at home. Jot down questions as you think of them and bring it with you to your clinic visit. I'd also like to tell you to be afraid of Google. There is a lot of false information out there regarding lupus in particular. So just beware what you read. As wonderful as the internet is, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I always refer my patients to the Lupus Foundation website. This is a great resource. If possible, try to talk to other kids with lupus. We are lucky in Georgia. We have a couple families who are forming a support group, which is phenomenal. Because I think and it may not happen at the beginning right after the diagnosis, but to be able to have your child connect with another child with lupus to know that, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. But again, it's very much a balancing act, and trying to find that balance can be difficult, but you can do it. So I want to talk first about prednisone, because virtually all our patients are on prednisone, and certainly there are a lot of side effects, but again, it's a balancing act. We have to weigh the benefits of anything we do against the risk. The benefits of prednisone are, it works very quickly to quiet the immune system. In fact, prednisone works quicker than any other medicine out there. It's very effective. You'll see I put that effective, effective, effective. We know that prednisone does help quiet the inflammation, particularly in lupus, but we are weighing that against the risk of prednisone. What prednisone is doing by quieting the immune system, and again, remember the immune system is supposed to fight infection. There is an increased infection risk when your child is on prednisone. Steroids in general make you hungry. So just taking prednisone alone may put a little bit of weight on, but the reason there can be a lot of weight gain is prednisone makes you feel hungry, and hungry all the time. You'll eat a meal and an hour later your child's asking for another meal. And so that can be a tough one, but you really have to watch not just what you're eating, but how much you're eating. The moon face that comes with prednisone, one thing I try to always remind my patients is that this is going to happen. Your face is going to get round, but that is not permanent. Once we get kids on a lower dose of prednisone, that moon face goes away. So I think it's important to highlight that it's going to happen, but it will go away. Potentially, prednisone can raise blood pressure. It can increase blood sugar, can decrease bone strength. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about bones, how we can combat that. Not everyone notices mood changes, but some kids find that they're moodier when they're on prednisone. Some kids, it hypes them up. Some kids, it hypes them down. Sleeping can be difficult if you're on prednisone, particularly sometimes we have to have you on twice a day prednisone. I really avoid that and try to have you take it in the morning. But sometimes if you're on bigger doses or taking it twice a day, it can make it difficult to sleep. And then in our teenagers, you can experience some worsening acne or even new acne when you're on higher doses of prednisone. One thing I want to highlight is that it is very dangerous to miss a dose of prednisone. We all have a natural steroid called cortisol, and what happens when we're taking prednisone, our bodies stop making cortisol, and we all need a little bit of steroid every day. And so if your child is sick, please make sure you talk to your doctor's office to know what to do with your prednisone. So just wanted to mention some other medications that you may encounter. Hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil. Almost all of our patients are on this medication. We've learned that it can prevent flares of lupus. It potentially protects the bones, and there is some evidence that it may prevent blood clots. So all in all, it is an effective medication in lupus. The downside is it potentially can impact the back of the eye called the retina, but that tends to occur if you're on too high of a dose. And as pediatricians, we tend to always base doses of our medications on the child's weight. Mycophenolate, or there's two brands. One is called Cellcept, the other is called Myfortec. Commonly used in lupus. It's been around for a long time. The main side effect of this is immune suppression. Some kids have a hard time with GI or stomach upset while they're on this, and that's where the formulation called Myfortec has a special coating on it that has less GI upset. So if your child is taking Cellcept and notices upset stomach, Myfortec is an option. Some of the newer medicines are Benlysta and rituximab. These are medicines that target a certain type of white blood cell called B cell. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't know what causes lupus, but we know that B cells are a big player in lupus. So Benlysta and rituximab target B cells and tend to be used in sicker kids. And then cyclophosphamide is also, that drug has been around for a long time, tends to be used in sicker kids in kidney disease, and immune suppression is the main side effect. So taking medications as prescribed is really important in the management of lupus. I can't stress that enough. I would say that of my patients who are doing well, one of the main reasons they're doing well is they're taking their medications routinely. So just some tricks on how to remember medications. Make it part of your routine. Beware of the weekend. I think a lot of us, Monday through Friday have a routine, but then on the weekend, that routine is often disrupted. I know I have a daughter with a chronic illness, and during the week, we're pretty darn good about taking her medicine. And the weekend, I have to admit that every once in a while, we may miss a dose. I'd also encourage you to establish a relationship with your pharmacist. The pharmacist can give you a lot of information, not just about your medications, but can set up automatic refills on your medications and make sure that if you're being prescribed like an antibiotic by the doctor, that there aren't interactions with the medicines that you're on. So I would encourage you to get to know your pharmacist. The day of the week pill counters, this is a picture of one on the slide. Those are really helpful in helping you to remember your medications. In fact, this is what we use for my daughter, and it does, especially on the weekend where our routine is different. Carry some extra doses with you if you're out and about or happen to end up, although maybe not so much in the pandemic right now, but once we get past this pandemic, if you're out and about and have a change of plans and it's dinner time and you end up going somewhere for dinner, it's good to carry extra doses. There are now medication apps for smartphones that can help remind you to take medicines, as well as an alarm on your phone. And so that's what I've done with my daughters on the weekend. I set an alarm on my phone to remind us to give her medicine. So let's take a minute to talk about the sun, because we know that the sun can irritate lupus. Please have your child wear sunscreen every day. This is really important. Keep in mind that from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., that is when the sun is most intense. In terms of SPF, you don't need to go and buy SPF 100 or 100 plus. SPF of 30 to 50 is quite effective. And you want to get a sunscreen that has UVA and UVB blocker in it. If your child has sensitive skin, you should consider getting a sunscreen that is PAVA-free. When you are outside, look for the shade. Beware of this marker called a UV index. If the UV index is above 3, that's when the sun is more intense. So you really want to be cautious of being in the sun. There is now some protective clothing as well as detergent. There's detergent that you can wash clothes in, and it provides an extra layer of protection. All right, I talked briefly about your bones when we were talking about prednisone, and want to take a minute to discuss why it's important to protect the bones. That's because about half of your child's bone is laid down during the teen years, and some inflammation and steroids will decrease bone strength. How to increase bone strength: weight-bearing exercise, as well as calcium and vitamin D. And there are newer studies to suggest that patients who have low vitamin D levels potentially have more active lupus. So there's a blood test that you can monitor vitamin D levels. It's not so simple with calcium. But keeping foods that are rich in calcium and vitamin D is beneficial. In terms of preventing infection, we talked about some of the medicines increase your risk of infection. It's really important for your child to stay up to date on vaccinations. We strongly encourage a yearly flu shot. Right now, we're getting into flu season. So now is a great time to get a flu shot. We also recommend pneumococcal vaccines in addition to your routine childhood vaccines. So your medical team may suggest this to you, and we strongly support it. There are some medications in which you need to avoid vaccines that are what are called live vaccines, and you should ask your medical team about this. One of the most important ways to prevent infection is hand hygiene. Washing the hands will keep those germs away. And then staying away from sick family and friends. So stress, this is a tough one. Although it is difficult to prove that stress leads to a lupus flare, I have had several patients who say that they had a stressful event just prior to a flare. And I always encourage my families to do not hesitate to seek counseling. You can see I repeated that a few times because it is very common for my patients to see a counselor, and I think it's a great thought. Quality sleep and exercise can also help minimize stress levels and just overall good for both our physical and mental health. So school, I don't know if you've heard of what's called a 504 plan, but our patients with lupus and really many chronic diseases, the child by law is entitled to a 504 plan. And this is something that you'll have to talk to the school about. The school, typically it's a vice principal who is in charge of setting up 504 plans. But here's a list of some of the pieces that we recommend putting in a child's 504 plan for school. Sun protection, modified PE class, having an extra set of books, being able to use the restroom as needed, extended time to get from class to class. And then one that's really important is excused absences for any illness that could be related to lupus. I know in Georgia, they're very strict about missing school. And so I think it's important to check with your school on this. So what about flares? There's really a broad definition for what a flare is, but generally speaking, a flare is when there is an increase in lupus activity. And it's not always obvious, so that's why it's really important to have routine follow-up with your child's rheumatologist. When we look at teenagers, and this has really been my experience in practice, the number one reason that a teen has a flare is they are not taking their medications as prescribed. Another time that I will see flares is if you've gone on vacation and went to the beach and weren't cautious of the sun. So just again, watch the sun. And so here are some symptoms that might suggest a flare: a fever that you can't explain by an infection or other reason, a new or worsening rash. Here's a picture of a sore on the roof of this teenager's mouth. And although that looks pretty bad, sometimes these sores are painless. The kids don't even know they have them. Swelling in a joint, and then fatigue with some of these other symptoms. Generally, fatigue alone is not a lupus flare, but fatigue in the setting of some of these other symptoms is a sign of a flare. So thank you for your attention, and remember, you can take control of this disease. And now I will stop sharing.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Stevens, that was terrific. So much good information. I love that. Be afraid of Google. It's so true. Wikipedia, our favorite source, right?
Yeah.
There's so much information out there, and it's overwhelming and not always accurate. You're not always sure what is definitely accurate. which is why there's places like, Children's Healthcare of Georgia and the Lupus Foundation and Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, where you can get trusted resources and really utilize those. And seeking counseling, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about as a panel today. It was just, I think it's so important because this is life-changing. It's really something that we're all going to deal with through, as a parent, as a child with lupus, you're dealing with it for the rest of your life. So it really is something that we need to deal with head on. And the detergent, who knew there was sun protective detergent? I looked it up after I saw your presentation, and it really is. And it looks like it works. It gets really high ratings. So SunGuard is one of the brands that I looked up. But so you all have to check that out. SunGuard detergent, which was really fabulous. So as our panel is joining back in, please join with your videos, guys. I would love to see you. And we will get started into our panel discussion, moving on to our next session. So thank you all for joining us. We'll do some introductions here. Well, and obviously you've already met Dr. Stevens, so thank you so much for continuing the conversation with us. We also are joined tonight by Dr. Andrea Knight. And Dr. Knight is an affiliate member of the Center for Pediatric Clinical Effectiveness and Policy Lab at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, an assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Toronto, and associate scientist at the Hospital for Sick Children Research Institute. And Dr. Knight obtained her undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto and medical degree from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Columbia University in New York City. She completed residency in pediatrics and fellowship in pediatric rheumatology at CHOP, which is Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, for those not from our region, and earned her master's of science in clinical epidemiology from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Knight's research focuses on improving mental health for children and adolescents with SLE by investigating ways to enhance identification and treatment of youth with SLE affected by depression and anxiety. So we are really thrilled to have you here with us tonight and bring that expertise from the mental health aspect, because it is so very important. And we also are joined by Aisha Amin. And Aisha is here in our Pennsylvania region. Welcome, Aisha. Her daughter was diagnosed with SLE at the age of 14 and is now well into adulthood. So Aisha brings quite that transverse of getting into adulthood and managing, still, I said earlier, once a mom, always a mom, right? You're still a caregiver even to your adult children, no matter what happens. And actually shortly after her daughter was diagnosed, she served on the CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, on the Parent Advisory Board. So welcome, Aisha. We are also joined by Jennifer Merkel, who hails from Georgia tonight. Jennifer is the mother of 13-year-old Lizzie, who was diagnosed with SLE almost 2 years ago. She's almost 14, I heard you say earlier. And Jennifer is also the co-facilitator of the Lupus Parent Project, which is a peer-to-peer support for parents of adolescents and young adults living with lupus. So welcome. And last but not least, we have Shannon Oscar, who also hails here from Pennsylvania. Thank you, Shannon, for joining us. Shannon is also the mother of a 14-year-old daughter with lupus nephritis. Abby was diagnosed with SLE at the age of 11. And the family has been dealing with the impacts of this disease, obviously, for 3 years, and obviously bringing into a little different perspective, but the lupus nephritis adds a little bit different twist on things, and the challenges that they manage. So welcome to you all. So thank you so much for being here tonight and for the willingness to share your stories so that other parents who are potentially will go through this maybe in the future as we're recording this and use as a resource, but are on with us tonight and are experiencing probably very similar challenges that you guys have experienced. So just a reminder to our guests that if you have additional questions, please use the Q&A. And we'll get to as many questions as we can tonight. We've got a lot of great questions lined up, so we're going to just jump right into it. If you do have questions following this, and I'll ask Maggie to throw this up in the chat, I'll put our chapter's email up there at info@lupustristate.org, and feel free afterwards to, if you need some additional resources, please feel free to reach out to us or your local chapter. So let's get right into it. Now, we know this is part 2. This is digging into the details. We've heard a little bit more detail from Dr. Stevens. What are the things, some things to expect from medications, the stress levels, and all kinds of good stuff. But now that the shock of the diagnosis has hopefully worn off, I don't know that it ever wears off completely, but we've settled into maybe a little bit better of a routine. And Aisha, let's start with you, having that really longer term experience. How did you keep life as normal as possible? You're now living with a chronic disease in the family, and maybe not just one, maybe somebody else in the family has something else going on. How do you continue to get as normal as possible where lupus isn't the only thing that you talk about all the time? Aisha, you're on mute. Let's unmute you.
There we go. Hi. Wow. First, thank you for inviting me to be here. Listening to the presentation, it took me back to remembering what it was like to have a 14 or 15-year-old that was just diagnosed, and what we had to do as a family to bring normal back into the family. And it was funny because we had one summer, we actually had to sit down and decide and look at who liked to do what. I'm a beach person, so I was dragging everyone to the beach. My daughter couldn't handle the beach. So, and on the other hand, my daughter didn't like camping. She's a mall girl, so she wanted to shop in the malls where there was no sun. But we came up with a lot of very creative ways to still have fun as a family. What I had to learn, and my daughter helped me, and I will say, parents, listen to your children because they know how they feel and what's going on and what they like and what they don't like. And my little joke with that is my daughter named me her RN, and she would always say, "This is my mom, the RN." And until one day, I was wearing it as a badge of honor because I thought it was registered nurse. And for her, it was registered nag. So we definitely had to become creative. She had to look at what her interests were and really explore doing some things differently. She likes to cook now. She's an avid reader. She is the coordinator of all events. She is an awesome coordinator. So it depends on how active your child wants to be, but I would definitely encourage the family to sit down and come up with ways to revamp roles within the family also, and how to listen, because my listening had to change. Definitely, and I'm still always asking, do you want me to respond? And what am I supposed to do with this information you're giving me? Because I had to learn early on, and my greatest obstacle was, as a mom, I thought I could always fix it, that I had this magic wand that I could wave and my child would be better. And there is no such thing. That was the hardest obstacle for me. And in having conversations with my daughter, I realized that I couldn't fix it. So that was the biggest piece in navigating what was new for her and giving her space to explore. So I would just say, allow the space for them to redefine themselves, to recreate themselves, and the space for you also to do the same thing as a parent and as a family.
Great input. And first of all, as a mom, aren't we all an RN? So, whether there's a chronic disease involved or not, I think every child could give us that label. But anybody else want to comment on that? I think that's great. Listening differently, I think, is a really amazing tip, because we listen for certain things and we want to respond, and maybe there's not always a response that they're looking for, that it's just I need to share.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wish that I had had someone tell me when we first got the diagnosis. I always try to encourage when I meet a new parent of a child with lupus, that when they first got the diagnosis, like your whole world, like if you haven't experienced it, you just can't, you don't know, but everything revolves around it. And so, you know, when you're in it in the moment, you don't realize that it's ever going to be any different. So you feel like this is what my world is going to be like. So I always try to encourage new people that are in the midst of the newness, that it will eventually, you'll get used to it and it will be a part of your life. It won't be your whole life. So just an encouragement to the newer people.
Yeah. All right. Well, fantastic. And I do think that this, you know, recording will be a resource for people. So hopefully they'll find it sooner than later, and won't maybe take as long to realize that. But it is comforting to know that there will be some new normal, right? Kind of like what we're all experiencing right now with the pandemic, that's for sure. Dr. Knight, I'm going to turn to you for this one. How much information about lupus, especially for a younger child? You know, Shannon and Jennifer's children, and Aisha's too, were all pretty young, you know, 11, 12 years old is pretty young to absorb a chronic disease information. So how much is too much? When do you know how much information to give without scaring them?
So I think that's a really important question to think about. And I think I'll start off by saying, you know, I think parents know their children best, and every child's a little bit different. I think some children do want to know sort of the full picture in their mind. Other children really don't really want to know that much. So I would start off by saying, you know, think about the fact that as parents, you're experts of knowing your child and what you think that they can handle. And so starting from that, I think being truthful as much as possible is important about the fact that, you know, the diagnosis of lupus is a condition that, you know, and I liked what you said, Aisha, about it's not just the child, it's the family that's really going to be dealing with this for a long time. And I think being honest about, you know, what it means, what changes are going to be meant, or what changes are going to need to happen to deal with the lupus. I think that's important, more so than actually giving the medical details of, you know, what's going to be, like which specific organs and specific tests are affected. And I think it also depends on the age of the child. You know, as you said, if it's a young child who's 10, I think the level of detail doesn't necessarily need to be there unless your knowledge of your child would say otherwise. But if the child is more 15 or 16 at diagnosis, they very well might need to have more detail to know and feel like they have a bit more sense of control of what's happening. So I would keep all of those things in mind, but I think my experience has been, and I don't know if Dr. Stevens will have something else to say, but my experience has been that I think most of the time children want to know what is going to happen. What does this mean? Do I need a needle? Do I need to take medication every day? When am I going to see the doctor again? How many times? When do I need labs? I feel like that is sort of the very tangible and concrete information that children are looking for. But at the same time, I would always couple it with something reassuring or something comforting, saying, you know, I know this is hard, but we are going to be together as a family dealing with this, and that you're not alone. And I think that's important to couple with that hard information that, you know, often parents need to deliver to a child to say, okay, we need to do one more blood draw. And, you know, that could be really a big deal that particular week or any time that that's announced.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough. I'll mention, you know, we only have so much time in a visit. So I would encourage you, don't hesitate to reach out to your medical team after a visit. and Jennifer can tell you, I try to cram so much in, but then there's only so much time. So don't hesitate to reach out after a visit.
That's a good point. And so often we're always concerned about the doctor's time. I don't want to bother the doctor. I don't want to do this. I want, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
You're not a bother.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else want to comment on that or anything? We'll go on. All right. All right, so let's take a little bit of a couple of questions from the mental emotional health aspect, the stress that you talked about in your presentation, Dr. Stevens. There's a lot of different stress factors, especially right now. We add in a whole pandemic issue to it, which is another whole conversation in itself. But what factors, and Shannon, I'm going to start with you if you're okay with this one. What factors played into from a confidence level as a parent? At parenting, every especially if it's the oldest child, everything is new, right? Everything we go against is something different. But as a parent of a child or an adolescent with lupus, did that rattle you? Did it shake your confidence? How did you gain that control back again for yourself to say, okay, we got this?
I think part of it, just as Jennifer said in the beginning, is time. That it feels absolutely overwhelming in the beginning, and you feel like your world's upside down, and it's always going to be upside down, and this is always going to be the thing that's front and center in your life and in the life of your family, and you do realize that calms down. But I would say the number one thing that gave me confidence was just information. I spent a ton of time on the lupus.org website when Abby was first diagnosed, and sometimes I think read every piece of information that was up there. I do agree with avoiding Google and the rabbit hole that you can go down trying to diagnose and look up different alternatives and the things that can go wrong. But just in general, getting like good, solid information, whether it was through the Lupus Foundation, whether it was talking to her rheumatologist at CHOP, her team there was so great in the beginning, and I could send them questions and they would get back to me. The rheumatologist would call me at times, and in the beginning when I had so many questions, and I would make a note on my phone and just write down all the questions I had about, why she was taking the medication she was, how long she was going to have to take them, what the side effects were, and then, just sort of get those all in one place and then throw them all at the medical staff when they called. But they were very helpful with it. So I would just say, just getting that information and kind of getting my head around what lupus was and what I could expect was what got me back on my feet, I'd say.
Anybody else?
I agree. Information is the biggest thing, and staying away from Google. I ordered a book right after Lizzie's diagnosis. I did some searches and got a book, and that way, if I ever had any questions, I could go, to the index and look it up and just kind of have some information right in front of me that I could hold, and that helped. And one of the things that I found because I was pretty open about Lizzie's diagnosis, and you'll find that everybody knows somebody with lupus. And so they want to say, oh, I know somebody with lupus, let me give you their number. Or somebody with lupus would say, this is what you need to do. And so I think it was a big deal for me to come to a point where I didn't want, it's not that I didn't want to connect with others with it, but it was like, okay, it's different for everybody. And so I've got this. I don't need to talk to this person that has lupus and that person. And, when I got to where I could just, oh, thank you, appreciate it, and then move on and not feel like I needed to take everybody's advice.
Right.
I would absolutely agree. I was actually going to mention that a little earlier too. I remember specifically talking to my mom in the beginning and telling her how you do hear from a lot of people about, you know, an aunt that had lupus, or, you know, and I said, I really, like, I know lupus is so different for everyone. I kind of don't want to hear all those stories, because I don't want to worry about all the things that went wrong with everyone else and then worry that that's what's going to happen with Abby, because some people have challenges in one area and not in others. And I just like Jennifer said, I want to deal with what Abby has and what we can do and how we can help her. And, you know, I think the thought of like hearing too much from other people about what could go wrong made me nervous in the beginning.
Right. And if I can add, I think what helped us along was, in the beginning, we had an awesome fellow that was working with us, and he handed me a packet of information, because this was early 2000s, and I became familiar with what he gave me in the packet, and then what I asked for and what they gave me were her then medical records, because I wanted to get familiar with the terminology.
Mm-hmm.
The terminology was very important to me. And at that time, Monifa was old enough to understand what was going to be happening to her body, because my biggest thrust was me making a decision for someone else's body that they would have to live with my decision for the rest of their life. So my mental health was around making sure she understood why we were making the decisions, because she had to be able to articulate that at some point in her life and understand why the decision was made. So becoming familiar with the medical terminology and having those conversations. I never had a conversation with a doctor without her present. And I encouraged her to write down questions. And if she wanted me out of the room, she could ask them. She could ask me to leave, and she would ask the questions. Because again, for me as a mom, I'm making a decision for somebody else's body. And that scared me, really scared me. And the other thing I would wrap in there is I had to get information on being, I hate to say it, a permanent caretaker or caregiver, because I didn't know how long that role was going to last. And that meant me having some good mental health days and being able to take a break also. So there were both sides, one for Monifa, the child, but also for the parent, the primary caregiver, and the family. So I was looking at all those aspects and how to navigate it. Because I really didn't, I hate to say, I didn't care who else had it. I needed to be able to navigate what was going on immediately for me and our family. Yeah.
Yeah, tremendous information. And Jennifer, I want to go back to you for a second here. You co-lead the parent support group, you know, and you and Shannon both referenced that some of the information coming in from other people is just so overwhelming. How do you find now the support from other parents and supporting other parents is helpful now that you're not on the other side of a diagnosis, but you're just past that point where it's not so coming at you all the time, right? How did that evolve? How do you take that parent support group and work that in a positive aspect?
I was able to meet another mom at one of the first Lupus Parent Project get-togethers, and we met quite a few, but I connected with one who's actually the co-facilitator, and it has probably been the biggest help to me in this journey out of everything, to have someone else to call and to connect with and to Lucy, her name's Lucy. She's been on this journey a little bit longer than I have. But it was funny because when we started talking, right after that, my daughter was going to go somewhere with a friend. And it was the first time she was going somewhere without me. And I didn't even think about it. And the mother came and they got ready to go. And then I had all these emotions and I like, oh my gosh, what is this and that? And I hadn't prepared for that. And I just blurted out, she has lupus, right? I mean, because and I didn't, once she left, I just kind of fell apart because I was like, I should have done a better job preparing for it. I didn't know what to say, and so to be able to call someone and connect with Lucy and say, hey, this happened, and for her to totally understand and us to talk through, just it made a world of difference for me. There was another instance where we were having a difficult time. Lizzie was in a flare, and my husband and I, guys just want things fixed. And I forgot what the issue was. And he just kind of was, we weren't really arguing hard, but it was just sort of a little bit of an argument. And I had my feelings hurt because I felt like he thought I was supposed to do something different, fix it. And so to be able to call Lucy and say, hey, this happened, and for her to say, oh, that's happened to me and my husband too, and this is, and just to connect and be able to know that I'm not the only one, it's made a world of difference. Literally, it's been a lifesaver to my family. So, and that's what we're hoping with the Parent Project, is just one, for us all to connect, but hopefully for you, those who are there to meet someone that they connect with and to be able to call and just know that they're not alone and talk about those moments when you just aren't sure what you're going to do. It's.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point though, is that you weren't ready for that right in the beginning, but you got to a point where it became really necessary and has become so valuable to you that that's a good reminder for all of us that, no doesn't mean not never. It just means not now, right? So that's just a big reminder that things change, processes change, and we evolve, right? We become open to different things and need different things throughout our life with anything that we do. And this is no different. So I think that's a really valuable point, that you weren't there yet, but now it's a very big portion of what helps you. So that's great. Anybody else want to add to that? All right. So we've talked about parent stress. We've talked about ways to cope with parent stress. How do we? And Dr. Knight, I'm going to go to you. Start with you on this one. How do we help the child cope with the stress? How do we encourage? One of those things that Dr. Stevens talked about is, mental health, really making sure that that's a big part of what we do. What do we do to emphasize that with our kids? How do they even understand that?
So I think a couple of things, and I think, what I'm going to say is going to echo a lot of what Aisha and Jennifer and Shannon have already touched on. So first of all, I think as a parent, recognizing the importance of your own mental health is really, really critical, because, as several people have said tonight, you're really there as the sort of strong point for your child. And if you don't take care of yourself, it's going to be really difficult to navigate and deal with such a complicated disease with a lot of different aspects to kind of hold together. And never mind, not only for your child with lupus, but any other children you have and any other family members that are dependent on you as a parent. So I think that's really important to keep that really front and center, taking care of yourself and making sure your own mental health is taken care of. So I would say that as the first thing. Then I think in terms of, your child's mental health, I think being very open about it and making it feel safe to talk about their emotions is really important. So sort of frequent, not badgering, but frequent opening up the conversation. So, it doesn't have to be something like, are you depressed? Because, that can be very intimidating for a lot of kids, but it can be, how are you feeling about things? How's it going? And sort of, I find even in sort of general conversations with my own kids, if you sort of have a very open-ended, not intimidating question, and sort of wait for that silence. There might be silence first, but kind of wait for them to kind of settle into the moment. They often will bring up some of the emotions that they're feeling. And then to sort of let them talk. And I know, Aisha, you said this as well. Let them voice their emotions. And don't be too quick to jump in, I would say. Let them kind of say what they're feeling, feeling like they're not going to be judged for what they're saying, and then make it a safe space for them to express their emotions. And I would, emphasize that I think it's important to do this on a relatively frequent basis, because as so many have said, there's a lot of different phases that happen from the time of diagnosis to with lupus. And so there's going to be different emotions that crop up as, the diagnosis settles in. And then if there's a period of flare, that's a whole nother set of emotions. And then getting back to a period of remission or an inactive disease is a whole nother set. So there's going to be sort of ebbs and flows, I think, with the course of having lupus, and giving the kids a chance to sort of experience that and talk about that. Another option for helping kids to deal with their emotions, if they're apt for writing or they like to write, journaling can be very helpful for them to express their emotions. Some kids like to draw. That would be another thing. Sort of finding ways that they can channel their emotions. If it's not talking, there might be other ways that they want to express their emotions. And I think, through all of this, it's important to strengthen their friendships and their peer relationships so that they can feel like there are some aspects of their lives that are relatively normal, and that I think the social and peer relationships are really important at the time that most kids are getting their diagnosis of lupus. And, as you've said, as many of you said, it sort of turns everything upside down. And so to try to keep those relationships going as much as possible, even though the lupus is really all consuming.
There's a great question I'm going to jump to in our chat, and it's the question is really directed to you, Dr. Knight. Is, are children's mental health issues readily identified, and do they feel overwhelmed with worrying about their parents as well as themselves? That's a great point.
That is a really great point, actually. So, for the first part, in terms of are the emotions readily identified, I think, a lot of kids can feel like they don't want to say how they're feeling, either because they don't know what's going to happen if they tell somebody. So let's say that they're feeling really down or really worried, or maybe they are worried, and I've heard this, several times, that they are worried about it's going to be too stressful for their parents. So they might perceive stress that's happening for their parents, and they don't want to add to that stress. And that can be fairly common as well. So I think in terms of identifying, I think that sort of frequent and open communication with the parents is very important. And then also, encouraging, or when you go to your doctor's visits, being sort of proactive and willing to bring up that conversation. If you're noticing that, your child is feeling a little bit stressed or a little bit down, I would really encourage you to bring that up with your doctor. Because I think, and this is, I know was on Dr. Rouster-Stevens' slides, I think the earlier the better that any emotional distress is identified, the best chance that there is to either, prevent further accumulation of distress, or, address the emotions right there and then. So I think that keeping an open communication is really key to identifying emotions that can be distressing for the kids.
And a good reminder that our kids, man, they pick up on it, well, almost everything, but they so often pick up on the stresses that we are dealing with. And we think we're doing a good job of keeping it internal and not expressing it, but they sense it, and they're worried about us, you know, on a lot of different levels. So really good point. And I'm going to pause for just a minute. It's 8 o'clock. We had set an hour for this. We're going to keep going. I'm just going to remind everybody that we are recording this program. So if you do have to jump off with us and can't stay further, we have so many good questions in this conversation. I really want to keep this going. So we're going to hang on for a little bit more if you guys are all good with that. And but again, we are recording. So if you need to leave us, you're gonna get a copy of the recording and you won't miss a thing. So. And Dr. Knight, you kind of led us right into that next section of that school and social aspect. And Dr. Stevens, you touched on this in your presentation as well with the 504. First of all, I do want to clarify for anybody the difference between an IEP and a 504, right? And an IEP is really for design, it's for a child who needs special education in some way, shape, or form. A 504 is more focused on accommodations. So it doesn't mean that your child couldn't have both and doesn't need the IEP, but what Dr. Stevens was really referring to in her presentation, the 504, was those accommodations to help from an illness standpoint and things like that. So you will want to, you know, every child is different, so I just wanted to make sure we're clear on that. So we've got this whole aspects of talking to your school, talking to your kids' friends, engaging. Friendships are so important. So challenging at this age, especially for young girls, right, in that 13, 14 years old. And how did you, and Jennifer, let's start with you on this one if we could. How did you tell Lizzie's friends? How did you get them engaged and you know, rally them around her, so to speak?
I think one of the most important things I did was talk to her about it and find out what she wanted. She tells some of her friends, she doesn't tell everyone. So I really try to listen to her and how she's feeling. I think one of our biggest challenges is like if she wants to go somewhere to spend the night or whatever, and first thing she'll, you know, beforehand, she's like, you don't have to tell their moms, I'll take my medication on my own. Like, no, that's not going to work. You know, if you're going to go spend the night somewhere, I'm going to have to at least, you know, have a talk with the parent. And so that was a challenge at first, but I think she's kind of, you know, understands now that's a, you know, something that I can't compromise on. But I think the biggest thing was just listening to her and giving her the words, because she would come home from school and say, you know, they asked me what lupus is, and I remember, you know, that you told me, but I don't really know how to tell them. And so we actually even wrote it down on a little card, just the basic, so that like when she was at school, if someone asked, she would have the words to be able to tell them. So that was the main thing.
That's a really good tip, because it's a lot of information for a kid to absorb, right? And to understand what their disease is. They know what they have, they can tell you what they have, but do they really understand what it is and what it does? And how do you share it in a way that another 13-year-old or 11-year-old understands it as well, because they're new to them as well.
Yeah, and for us, what Monifa wound up doing was she made her lupus a science project. I think it was 11th grade. And she had the presentation board, the pictures, all of her symptoms. And she was even willing, because she had lost a lot of her hair, and she took a picture because a lot of the students didn't know that she was wearing a wig. And she took a picture of her with no hair. And I think that was for her science presentation. I think for her friends at school, it gave them insight into what she was going through, which was interesting. And for us, we had to deal with the IEP for high school and the 504 for college, because that's what the college required when she was going, was a 504. So in some regards, depending on where you're at, what state you're in, you may need both, especially if they're going into college. They will definitely need an accommodation. So the high school was able to help us transition into the 504 for the college for what they needed. So there are ways that they can let their friends know, creative ways they can let their friends know what it's about.
That's for sure. Anybody else? Any pushback or any tips for sharing the information with school that you all as parents have been through that you might want to share with anybody?
Sorry, go ahead,
No,
Shannon.
yeah. I was just going to say on the Lupus Foundation website, I did find a lot of resources there. You know, they have a letter template on there that you can send to the school that explains what lupus is and how it can impact your child, and suggest, you know, sort of in that format that you meet with them, and it sort of gave us like a bit of a pathway for how to deal with the school. And then we were able to sit down with the vice principal and sort of a social worker at school and sort of like her homeroom teacher and talk through things with her. And they've been really great. You know, every year they'll come back and meet with us and tell us if they see anything with Abby and you know, just kind of get some feedback with each other about her concentration levels and how she's doing in class. But I would say again that the Lupus Foundation website was a really great resource for us in communicating with the school.
Awesome.
We also found with Lizzie's first meeting, they had the county school nurse come out, and she was very knowledgeable about what lupus was, much more so than the school nurse. And so it was really good to have her there to kind of educate the teachers and the rest of the people at the meeting so that they would understand. And it was nice to have her there because it wasn't just me saying, oh, you know, she has these symptoms. It was an actual, registered nurse that was able to tell them and educate them. So that was very helpful to us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Can I make a quick comment? I have to give kudos to the Lupus Foundation. They have a program where they're educating school nurses about lupus. And so I suspect that this nurse received some amazing education from the Lupus Foundation. And I just wanted to point that out and say thank you to the Lupus Foundation for doing that.
I know our school pulled resources off the Lupus Foundation site too, because when we sat down, she had some of the same materials that I did that she pulled off the Lupus Foundation website. So it's a great resource.
That's terrific. And is there some way as parents, and Shannon, I'm going to go to you on this one, is there something as a parent that you've done or a way to empower your child to, I guess in some way after the diagnosis, to, I don't want to say own it, because they're going to own it when, you know, they have to, there's no choice. But is there something that you did or a way that they kind of said, okay, I've got this? Was there a turning point for Abby at all?
Yeah, there really was. And she was diagnosed in October of 2017. So by the spring of the next year, you know, within the first year of her lupus diagnosis, she decided, you know, throughout the course of that year that she wanted to do a fundraiser at school around lupus awareness in May. And so I sat down with her and helped her write an email to the principal at the school and explain what she wanted to do, explain a little bit about what lupus is, and she goes to a Catholic school where they have uniforms, and so they have dress down days where everyone can come to school and dress down, and they pay $1 to do that, and they collect the money from everyone at school and then give it to a charitable cause. So she sort of, you know, wrote a little proposal for that I helped her with and sent it to the school. And then Abby's message then went out to the rest of the school, to the entire school, saying, my name is Abby Oscar. I'm in 5th grade. I was diagnosed with lupus this year. And then, you know, just a brief couple of sentences about what lupus is. And I'm going to be raising money for the Lupus Foundation of America for this tag day, and please participate. And so it was a great way for her to to take control of the message, to let people know what's going on with her. And she was never very very shy about it. She would talk to people about it from the beginning and tell them what was going on. I think in many ways she felt relieved that there was a reason why that she had some of these symptoms that she did before, that she wasn't, you know, like in her head or and so I think for her it was just having an answer for why she felt that way. And so I think that was the first time with that little project that she took on at school with a fundraiser that she was really able to own what lupus was for her, and what it, you know, with and the way that she could communicate that with her friends and her school community.
Fantastic. And I will say, personal experience with Abby is she was at our national summit 2 years ago, I guess, when we were actually able to be live and in person. She presented to congressmen and senators, and she was amazing. So she did a really great job. And so, all right, we're gonna shift gears a little bit and going to go a little bit more medically related from a couple questions. And so, Dr. Stevens, I'm going to start with you on this one. Why is lupus more aggressive? Typically, in children, when you're diagnosed at a younger age, it tends to be a little bit more aggressive. Why is that?
We don't entirely understand why. One of the thoughts is that, and lupus is not like a genetic disease, but genes seem to play a role, that perhaps kids have more of a genetic burden versus adults. Or is there something in the environment that's triggering it? So it's not entirely clear why, but we do know that generally speaking, kids have more aggressive disease compared to adults.
And does that settle as we get into adulthood? Does it, if you were diagnosed at 21 versus 11, although most 21-year-olds will probably say, I've had this all of my life, right? I probably had it and just wasn't diagnosed. But as they get into adulthood a little bit, does it even out a little bit from a severity standpoint? And again, it's very heterogeneous. We know that it's different.
It is.
But just
right. And so one area that we're lacking research in, but hopefully that we hope to do a better job, is more long-term, like looking at kids diagnosed in childhood, maybe 20 years later, what's going on. We really don't have good information, but there's some organizations who are hoping to really look at these long-term studies of people who were kids when they were diagnosed, and seeing what's happening down the road.
Yeah, and a great opportunity just to plug the reminder of the importance of clinical trials and studies and registries, patient registries. The Lupus Foundation has recently launched a new patient registry, revised, I should say, patient registry called RAY, Research Accelerated by You. And you can just research, Google, there's a good chance to use Google. I go to lupus.org and just search RAY or Research Accelerated by You. Really important to keep track of that information for sure. And so as we get into your child, kind of Morris and Aisha, I'm gonna start with you on this one. As your child gets closer into adulthood and becomes more able to manage appointments and medications, and how do you start to relinquish that control and empower your child to take on that control of getting their refills done on medications, making their own doctor's appointments? And as many of us are going to get into that point, they will all get to that point, right, of growing up. How did you manage that?
Well, it's funny. I'm reflecting back because there were two phases for me. The agreement was, going away to college. She wanted less involvement from me. So our agreement was, if you're going to college, then you become responsible for your doctor's appointments and your meds. Yes, you're still on my insurance. So the control, for lack of a better word, is that I will know, but you become responsible. So she that was the first layer of the transition. And she did pretty well with that. Our biggest fight was her taking meds during college because she's not home. I can't see her. I'm just remembering she did have a flare on campus, but it was senior year. So I was very grateful that we were able to get through it. However, we had our biggest battles around her medications. I'm saying it's still remembering what she said to me, and it was that this was her life. And she had to make the decision based on the doctors that she had. And that was very hard for me. And I'm almost welling up again because she stood her ground on that. And I could not move her from that. Is that this was her life, her body, and she had to make that decision. And the only thing I made sure of was that she had an excellent team of doctors that would give her the information that she needed. And her rheumatologist, Dr. Thomas, was straight, no chaser with her. And I always I'm even still thanking Dr. Thomas for that, because that was the doctor she went to for adult care. So one, helping them transition from pediatric to medical. And folks, it's a completely different beast in adult medicine. It's not like pediatric at all. Pediatric, they're calling you, and adult, they're not calling you at all. They're calling the child directly. And the second phase of when she was aging out off of my plan, and I think at that time it was 24, because then she had graduated college, and my thrust was, you need to find a job that has a good medical plan that will take your pre-existing condition, you know. So for me, it was two phases. It was her transitioning from high school to college, which was really into adult medicine, and then transitioning her from my health plan to her health plan. So, and the conversation, the very hard conversation that she had with me about, Mom, this is my body, and I have to do what I think is right. That is still it. I'm still swallowing that pill, and she's 35 now. So
Once a mom, always a mom. That's
Yeah.
for sure. That is for sure. Nothing that never changes.
Yes.
And Shannon, how did you, and obviously you're still in the process of things change, but how did you help Abby understand the role of each of those medications, to understand the importance of those, you know, to Aisha's point that, you know, it's, they need to own that, right? So I think you've had some experience in that.
Mm-hmm. She's, I think someone else said earlier, maybe it was Aisha, that, you know, she's in on every conversation with her doctors. So she knows very clearly when they come in, they ask what medications, and I let her answer those questions, and she'll tell them. She goes through the list, and she'll say, you know, Cellcept and Plaquenil and Losartan, and, you know, and goes. She doesn't always know the dosage. She just knows how many she takes, and she knows what the medications are. I think her understanding more, like she knows that she takes the levothyroxine for her thyroid, and she knows that she takes the immunosuppressant for her lupus nephritis and things along those lines. But I think as she gets older, I really want her to have more of an understanding of what those medications are, of what exactly they're fighting, the role that they have in her body, and how, you know, how they're addressing the different aspects of her lupus. So she's she's smart, she's bright, she has a good handle on that, on what she's taking, and sort of what it addresses. But I think even I hope that she gets more of that. That's one of the things that I want her to understand more as she gets closer to adulthood, is what those what those medications mean long term. When she can start weaning off of some of them. She's already come down a little on her immunosuppressant over the last few years, and so I want to make her part of that conversation along with her nephrologist and her rheumatologist as well. So I think it's just a gradual education process, and just making sure that she's involved in those decisions about her health from as young an age as she can be.
Mhm.
And Shannon, I would add to that. I totally agree with what you're saying. And I would say one of the things that I've noticed is when children are diagnosed with lupus at a younger age, that's discussed, what the lupus is at their level. But I think it's important for the doctors and the parents to realize as they grow older, they might need a new conversation to say, okay, let's talk about this again, because their understanding at age 10 and their comprehension is going to be different as they get older, and it's worth revisiting and remembering to do that. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, the second conversation is a really important point that they do. They grow up, they start to learn and understand more. So it's time for a different conversation and a higher level conversation. But Shannon, you brought up a really good point about weaning off of medication. And, typically, right, so we're just going to say typically there could potentially be a lot of medication thrown at a new diagnosis to stabilize and get into a point where we're comfortable and we've been there. And Dr. Stevens, I'll go to you on this. Is there a time, and how do we start to recognize that and have that conversation about weaning down a medication or titrating down a dosage or removing something altogether even?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? It's at the beginning, it's always easy to say, okay, this is what's going on and we've got to get this inflammation under control and here's what we're going to do. And then eventually the goal is to get things quiet and when to back off. And so kind of my approach is the prednisone, like that's got to come down first. It's a great drug, but we want to get you down on that as quick as possible. But again, that balancing act, controlling the disease. I really tell my patients, and I don't know if Dr. Knight does, that they're going to be on Plaquenil or hydroxychloroquine indefinitely, because we've learned that helps keep lupus quiet and can prevent flares. So I tell them when you eventually transition to the adult rheumatologist, you're going to be on hydroxychloroquine.
And our rheumatologist called that vitamin P and told us
yeah.
Like always.
Right. So like say we get you off the prednisone, then and things are still going well, quiet, then we try to back off on the other medicines, and it is, I find, a little harder than, again, when things are flaring or active at the beginning and boom, we know we have to do this, but backing off, I know I kind of hold my breath and cross my fingers, and but it's possible. It's definitely possible.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think, the vitamin P concept is very, very common amongst the rheumatologists, and we do communicate that to our families. But I think really, our common goal is that we're trying to be on the least amount of medication as possible, but knowing that, we don't yet have a cure for lupus. The reality is that there probably will be some degree of medication needed for a lifetime, and hopefully that's just Plaquenil, the vitamin P, but but it may be more. But I do think that, you know, over time, once things are quiet and stable for some period of time, and that's where it differs from rheumatologist to rheumatologist, the goal is to certainly to get off prednisone, but even to try to wean some of the other medications that are used besides Plaquenil.
Really good info. And one last area that we're going to target, and then I think we can wrap this up, is let's just talk a little bit more about preventive health. And Dr. Stevens, you really addressed a lot of this in your presentation with vaccines, bone health with exercise, weight-bearing exercise, the calcium, vitamin D, and just generally the importance of exercise and rest, obviously. What else as parents do you guys try to do to ensure that your child stays healthy? Prevention, it's so hard right now. Obviously right now it's probably a little easier. We're all home, we're all staying inside, we're not really out and about. But over the years, what are some things that maybe you have done additionally that maybe we haven't hit on?
I know one of the things I talk about with Monifa to keep a stress-free life is that secrets make you sick. So we have conversations about being honest and about being open, because unconsciously sometimes those things are they're stressful. So I've had to hold on to my chair and listening to the conversations where I couldn't fix things, where she just needed to talk about what was going on in her life, especially with boyfriends and all the other stuff that comes up. So I am a proponent to keep the stress down, that secrets make you sick. So we don't want to promote, I'm not promoting secrets at all. We need to talk about everything. Everything needs to be on the table. We need to be able to have adult conversations around them. And no judgment, as little judgment as possible.
Yeah, judgment in private.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's hard to do. That's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, and I'll throw one last question out, just in light of the talk about our vaccine that's potentially coming out in the coming months. And from a Dr. Knight, Dr. Stevens, from your perspective, what are your recommendations? How do you advise a parent regarding the COVID vaccine that's coming out?
Who wants to answer?
If you want to take the fifth, that's okay too.
No,
Refer to your doctor.
The thing I would emphasize is these are not live vaccines in the United States. And I believe, is that also true in Canada?
Yeah.
So, right, these are not live. So, you know, that is one thing I'm going to emphasize to my patients. And I am happy to share with them, and I'll share it now. I am looking forward to getting the vaccine. I will be getting the vaccine when it is available. Yeah, I think, you know, time will tell. We have some really good information so far, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, from the information that I've gotten and the things that I've been reading, the vaccine, you know, is being developed by different companies. And I think it's encouraging that, you know, similar results are happening and coming out amongst the different companies that are making this vaccine, that's showing that it's effective and that they are, although it's in a more streamlined and rapid fashion, they are still adhering to the safety protocols and the research methodology that, you know, the methods that lead to production of safe vaccines. So I think, you know, I am reassured in that sense. And, you know, there's just like any vaccine that's developed, there's always a period of observation once the vaccine becomes on the market. But I also am going to be enthusiastic about getting the vaccine, and I will be recommending for my patients to get the vaccine as well.
Wonderful. Well, and I think we'll wrap it up on that note. I just can't thank you all enough. This has been just really one tremendous conversation. And I know that the sharing could go on for hours, and it would be still so informative. So thank you for sharing, parents, sharing your experiences, your stories. So helpful. And I hope that people that are listening and will watch this in the future really gain some insight that there is the light at the end of the tunnel, really, once you get past that hump. Dr. Stevens, Dr. Knight, thank you so much. Your expertise, your work in the field for supporting the lupus community is tremendous, and we thank you. We applaud you, is right. So listen, everybody have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you again in the new year for part 3. I'll remind everybody, part 3 really is about transitioning to adulthood. So, watch for emails and information, but that'll be, February, March-ish when we bring up part 3 of this series. So again, our thanks to you. Have a blessed and a safe holiday and the rest of 2020. And let's look forward to 2021 and the good stuff that will come with 2021. Exactly. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Night.